Resume our panel on solidarity as part of the Conference for the Equilibrium of the World. This afternoon, we will have a special lecture by Raúl Capote, a journalist, a researcher. This afternoon, he will be speaking about the hybrid fourth generation war. After his presentation, we will now give the floor to several of our friends who have requested to make some comments about their own experiences and share with us the evolution of their struggle. And then we will entertain some questions and comments, and we will continue to debate on the solidarity actions that we should all carry out in order to cope with these fourth generation warfare. So I will give the floor to Raúl Capote. Good afternoon. It is to me really a great honor to be able to share with you in this forum. I would like to begin by the acknowledgments. I would like to thank ICAP for the kindness of inviting me. ICAP is an institution that I love very much. It was an institution that welcomed him after the denunciation appearing in the Reasons of Cuba, a denunciation that was made. Can you hear me? Perhaps if I speak closer to the mic, you will hear me better. I was saying that the ICAP is an institution that welcomed me after the denunciations appearing in Reasons of Cuba. This was made. This was a denunciation of the U.S. and CIA agency plans against the Cuban Revolution. I was able to be part of that. ICAP opened the doors to me, and I feel pleased about this invitation. And it is my turn to discuss an issue you have heard a lot in the last few years. A lot has been said about the fourth generation war. A lot has been said about some analysis, some of them brilliant, some of them not as brilliant, about this war that is being waged all over the world. I have an English translator here by my side. I was saying that I had my English translator by my side, but the rumor ran. Something very funny happened a while ago, because at the dining hall, some people asked me, it is true that in the afternoon, a CIA agent was going to reveal a series of secrets about the non-conventional war. And I said, well, these had to be a fake Cuban launching these sort of pond. Well, a lot is being said nowadays to discover all the elements that are part of this war. We are speaking about a definition when we are referring to the fourth generation war that was launched, created, and conceived in 1989 by four Marines officers who wrote and designed a theory about this kind of war and the need of the U.S. government and army to launch a war whereby they could have the lowest possible costs. But what kind of war are we talking about here? you will very soon realize how this is going on in today's world. Back then, they spoke about the use of guerrillas, as they called it, against guerrillas, paramilitary forces. They spoke about the use of propaganda. They talked about the use of the media, as well as the emerging possibility of using digital media like they did in 1989 in this kind of conflict. What has happened ever since? We have witnessed the development of new technologies, of course. It is now possible to efficiently carry out this war in many places of the world. But I usually wonder, how can we call this war launched by the U.S. government, by the U.S. imperialism, for example, in Palestine? Because somebody could say, well, in Palestine, the Israelis are the aggressors, but who are the ones who really have to do with that? You may wonder, what kind of war was launched in Afghanistan? Is that a third generation, first generation, fourth generation war? How could we call the war that is being carried out against the people of Colombia? This never appears in the manuals or the negotiations whenever people speak about soft power. But a lot has been said about this war with the use of paramilitary forces. But there is an element that they very strongly resort to, which is the use of drug trafficking and criminal gangs, which are part of these projects and these plans. What kind of war has been waged against Venezuela? What kind of war has been waged against Cuba? How can we classify the war that was launched in 2014 in Ukraine, the famous bringing about, as a consequence, all the conflicts that we see now in that country? What are we being faced with, and how are we facing it? And of course, we have to find an answer to those questions. Based on the definition made by these gentlemen of the Marines Corps, the ones that gave a name to it, although it is not a strategy that emerges from these officers, all they did was to put a face to a project that was being developed by the U.S. government. In addition, there is a very well-known and remarkable expression in all the work that is being carried out by Bin Chat, with all his theory about the soft coup, or Tom Harvey with construction of these theory. Tom Harvey made a contribution to soft coups, saying that it was necessary to oust a government, to destroy the pillars propping up those governments. And that is very interesting because the theory contributed to this conception stated very clearly that it is not about achieving the government that was targeted by this aggression to renounce, but rather to cause an implosion in that government. And this is important. What Harvey was saying, what Chad was saying, was simply the creation of chaos to wreak havoc in order to meet the goals they pursued. And that is why I find it very difficult when speaking about fourth-generation war to make a difference between these and the imperialist war. A third, second, or fourth-generation war is just the same now with the use of technologies and the internet. And of course, apparently, in their discourse, this is a lower cost war. We all know that the U.S. budget, the military budget, and the communication budget is almost equal for launching these wars. These are the highest budgeted branches in the U.S. government. They allocate a lot of money using the internet and communication, and they use as much money for military expenses. They already include a very high budget to launch this war. Today, this is for them vital, absolutely vital, to meet the goals of domination and hegemonic control. And today I said to myself, well, how can I address this kind of talk with you? I will do it as a scholar, perhaps, given a major theoretical lecture about the fourth generation war. Who will be sitting at the chair? The scholar, the journalist, or the revolutionary combatant that had the opportunity of living through that experience? Shall I talk to you about not only the results of my research, but also about the experience of having been part in the organization of this kind of war against Cuba and Venezuela? And I concluded that I would rather do it the last way, out of respect for all of you. Joana Tablada was advancing many of the concepts that we will be discussing here, because that definition she made, and I took note of some of the elements she dealt with in her lecture when she was speaking about the three fundamental elements of the war launched by the U.S. against Cuba. She talked about the economic warfare. She talked about the war against the prestige of a whole nation. She talked about the political and ideological subversion, and she was referring to the three main pillars of the fourth generation war, which are economic warfare, the war against the prestige of a nation, and political subversion. Now, how is this structured? Based on these definitions made by the U.S. government itself in order to carry out this war in the world. In the USA, at the CIA, the one mandated with the launching of this war, there is a center called Center of CIA Special Activities. This used to be a former division of the Covert Actions, but this is the new name, Center of Special Activities of the CIA, with two subgroups. One group devoted to the actions as such, covert actions as such. They are experts in coup d'etats, they are experts in the construction of paramilitary groups, they are specialists of carrying out whatever action having to do with attempt against the life of leaders, political leaders, or heads of human rights movements. All those people they think should be eliminated. And these are the political action groups. This is a division within the CIA. They create task forces. This political action group, with a long history within the CIA, carried out actions for many years. They had to do with what happened in Chile at the time of the coup d'etat against Allende. They had to do with the Condor plan in Latin America, with many other actions carried in the world for many years. Right now, under this new structure within the CIA, they have been entrusted with the mission of incorporating into their modus operandi the internet and the new communication technologies. And this political action group, for its work, creates task forces. The task forces hire next centers. They hire next centers organized by the task group to carry out research in the field. They research on the big data, whereby they make a macro sector research. Most certainly you have read about the scandal of Campus Analytica and their involvement with electoral processes. These people specialized in that, hired by the task forces with the purpose of using this information for subversion against countries which are the victims of these aggressions. They also hire cyber mercenaries. They hire digital lackeys, digital henchmen. These social networks world is filled with the people devoted to these purposes. Their great pleasure in this world is precisely bullying and harassment. These persons are identified, hired, placed under their service. These next centers are entrusted with the mission of building bot trolls. They have artificial intelligence technologies, state-of-the-art technologies, allowing them to know in full details the territory in which they are acting and the peoples upon they will be acting through the social networks. We know that today in every cell phone, when you upload into a social network, you state your name, the name of your friends, your preferences. You are being asked on and on, which are the preferences, your preferences, either of musical groups or any other preferences. And people are controlled through those social networks, and all of this information will end up in the hands of these people for certain purposes. We may find this as an unimportant thing. Facebook asking you, for example, do you want to connect to social networks using your image? Or if you find it much more comfortable, instead of using passwords, to click on accept so that you are visually identified, your face is identified. So where will this information will end up? There are people including their clinical records in the cell phone. You purchase through cell phones. You establish the tour you covered every day through cell phones. Cell phones will indicate you which is the best path to reach your work center. How can you reach your friends' houses? Your preferences are in the hands of these people. Their mission is precisely that, to make up a profile of you. So when they organize an attack against a population in particular, all of these is perfectly studied beforehand. Young people who live in Cuba, for example, or in Havana, or in the municipality of Centro Havana, between 15 and 18 years of age, what are the sports they prefer? What are the TV programs they watch? Whom they are most acquainted with? They have all of that information, so everything that appears on the social networks is based on that knowledge. If we were to set examples, specific examples about this type of war, about these type of aggressions, resorting to all of these tools, there are recent examples that I may say are examples that should be studied. Bolivia is one example, the coup d'etat against Evo Morales. 68,000 Twitter accounts appear from scratch. There are elements that can clearly seen before and after the coup d'etat against Evo. First, a very strong disparagement campaign against the Evo Morales government. This disparagement campaign pursues a specific objective. We have lived through that experience. They know only too well that if they manage to isolate Bolivia or Venezuela or Cuba, if they manage to diminish solidarity, if they manage all the people present here to believe their stories about Cuba, if they manage to leave all these countries in isolation, it would be very easy for them to attack us. It would be very easy for them to do whatever they do, which we know they do elsewhere in the world. They did it against Bolivia for years. And all of these become stronger during elections. Another thing that happens, I already referred to social networks and the demonization of the main political figures of the country, and they start to build a narrative about the people's indignation, using their activism and the power of social networks and all of these trolls and bots they create. Today, it is very easy to do that because formerly they hired a person that was able to do that work. But today, through artificial intelligence, you can create a group of people, thousands of people in the internet that do not exist in reality, just to convey messages as if they were real people. And there was a real flood of tweets against the Evo Morales government. That narrative about popular indignation, which is also part of the disparagement campaign, make many people in the world believe that the people is ready, that the people is sick and tired of the Evo's government. And another element that should be taken into account, because never before had we seen these so clearly, is what is part of this first strategy that was created in 1989, which is the fact that they recruit among criminal gangs. They recruit among delinquents, particularly among young people, using social networks based on all of these studies that they carry out. They know only too well who these people are. And in Cuba, we lived through that experience because they get in touch with an alleged person, and this person contacts a youth who has a lot of problems, and they start to exchange with that youth. We in Cuba lived through that experience long before through a plan that was called Sunsuneo, quite similar to what is being done today with modern technologies that became very attractive. Messages were sent to young people speaking about sportive issues, and young people became hooked up with all these persons because they were able to speak about football, baseball, such and such an actor or actress. And after they make these young people a fan of all of these elements, they started to be said, listen, we will reload your cell phone, but we need you to go to such and such a store. I am setting Cuba as an example. I will pay you a reload in your cell phone if you go to such and such a store nearby your house and throw a stone against the windows of that store. I will send you $40 for you to do that. All you have to do is to take a video of that action and relay it to me, but because I want to be sure that you did it. This was also done in Bolivia. They reached out to those young people, to those criminal gangs. We are speaking about people who are not members of the opposition. They are people with no criminal background, people that have nothing to do with politics. That is the first step. The second is to gather them up, to try to unite them. And in that process, then they resort to activists selected by them. These are people that are being paid by the U.S. government, and they start to reach out to those young people with no political background. And these young people start to receive money through the internet, instructions through the internet, but also through those activities acting upon them. They do it also in Iran. They start to create what they call swarms. They hand over modern cell phones to them. They train them for months. There are some of them receiving money in exchange for violent actions. They begin by throwing stones against the store or end up like in Bolivia by invading a radio station or burning people alive or organizing guarimba as in Venezuela. It is a mixture where several factors are involved. Capitalizing on indignation, a strong disparagement campaign against the government, diplomatic actions because there is a strong action on the part of the U.S. government in the diplomatic arena against those governments. There is a strong diplomatic action against those governments. We witnessed that in many materials arriving from Bolivia. There were a lot of diplomats acting inside Bolivia in an interventionist way, leading actions of this sort. And we also lived through that experience in Cuba. The purpose of this process is to generate chaos, to wreak havoc in the country. All of this is accompanied by a package of economic sanctions against the country, and also pursuing the objective of raising discontent and make people feel desperate. A country that is subjected to such an attack, according to CIA calculations, should be absolutely destabilized in every sense, emotionally, and suffering deprivations of every sort. A country that is permanently attacked by these social networks. If you live in a country like Nicaragua, Cuba, or Venezuela, you defend the revolution and you enter into a social network, you will be faced with a swarm of hating people. You are slandered, you are attacked, you are virtually condemned not to go out, not to utter a word in these social networks. Those persons under such attacks, with also cultural elements playing a role, you may realize that they are acting against a country that is subject to a very harsh cultural warfare. Those persons, according to CIA calculations, should act in a very emotional way. They are ready to explode, as they say, like a bomb, in the face of a minimum incentive. These persons should be ready to break with everything possible because they are at the verge of desperation. With the construction of stereotypes very well sought after, and these stereotypes are planted in the minds of people in such a way that in the face of those stereotypes, people take action immediately. And I will give you one example in Cuba. What is the difference in Cuba between an ordinary citizen in Cuba and other persons? In a country like Cuba, what an ordinary citizen is all about. This is a stereotype built intentionally so that when you hear about a leader, you will not consider that leader as part of your people. I am not inventing these. I learned that in practice. And it seems to be a very simple thing. Another example. When people spoke about the apparatus of the former Soviet Union, this was a stereotype that was created very strongly. If we review each and every one of our countries, there are elements that repeat on and on in the social networks. to make people react in the face of a certain stimulus with something that has been thought after from before. I said I would mix both things in order to have all these elements. And I will also speak about my own personal experience. When the last stage of what I consider the time we have gone through, the policy of subversion against Cuba, that strategy of subversion against Cuba, which started approximately in 2004, there is a group of elements that are important to take into account. The first thing they do is to train leaders for the change, what they call the new leaders for a change. Without those leaders, there would be nothing to do. In the case of Cuba, they recognized back then and publicly that they had lost the war against the historical leadership of the revolution. They recognize that. They also recognize that counter-revolution at their service in Cuba is not useful anymore because that counter-revolution has no social support. It is a counter-revolution alienated from the majority of the people. It is a discredited counter-revolution. So one immediate step was to build a counter-revolution that lives up to the goals they pursue in Cuba. And they repeat a formula that is nothing new in the case of Cuba. They take from the experience of Latin America certain elements. Because they have been doing these in Latin America for many years, there was a moment when in the continent, everybody realized that it was obvious that dictatorships would last no more and that the resistance were on the increase and that this reaction could end up in radical revolutions. This happened everywhere, and these dictatorships were being defeated by radical revolutions, ending up in processes similar to that in Cuba. So they started to train the new leaders. How do they do that? A central objective were the Latin American universities. In our continent, universities were the nursery ground of revolutions, of protests. Many universities in the continent were revolutionary universities, were universities that had a well-deserved prestige in countering the right wing and military dictatorships. Intervening those universities, changing the correlation of forces, training the cadre was going to become a central goal, and they started to use the scholarships for academic exchange for professors as well as for students. According to some of our calculations, more than 120 Latin American leaders in the fields of economy, politics, and other sectors had been trained in those kind of courses in the U.S. They had been trained in the U.S. as leaders. They had studied in the United States. In addition to that, in addition to these scholarships, as part of these scholarships, they put up scholarships for the training of leaderships. And this is the case right now. There are a bunch of NGOs around the continent whose mission is to train those cadre. And this experience rendered some results for them in the continent. These people served as mediators for a change to prevent radical revolutions from succeeding in the continent. Sometimes we are amazed because there are some leaders elected by the right, and you said, where do they come from? They were either part of a leadership course or a scholarship in the U.S. it is always the case. In the case of Cuba, this was crucial. And at the Cuban universities, it was necessary to train those leaders. And curiously enough, they started to look leaders in Cuban universities, sons and daughters of revolutionary people. If they were members of the Young Communist League, all the better, but they must comply with one fissure. They should be persons with a huge ego, with great aspirations. And they had to identify them and train them. And scholarships were very attractive because you send an email to the young people saying that you are going to receive a scholarship to study in a European university, and you will be covered every expense. And of course, there is no linkage with any counter-revolutionary activity. This is just a scholarship for your own training. You will go and attend those scholarships. You receive all the instructions for your training. And all you have to do at the end of the day to graduate is to come up with a project. You present a project. This could be an university extension project or a project about community work or any kind of project within your own university. Or, for example, the idea of making up a dance group or putting up a language lab for your university. And all of a sudden, an NGO will be in charge of financing that project for you. You would be returning to Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, wherever, supported by an NGO. When you arrive in your university, you say, I was in a course having nothing to do with the counter-revolutionary, with the intention of helping to put up a language lab in that university, or having a new court to practice baseball, or an excellent community project with a lot of funds. And you are told, if you are successful, you will continue to receive money. But that young man or girl linked to this project will be followed up, and that youth will then receive master's degree scholarship, then a scholarship for a PhD. And in the case of Cuba, this plan was to last for 10 years. In 10 years' time, how many people would they have trained in that kind of experience? And those persons, after graduation, and remember, they are not linked to any counter-revolutionary group. They are just studying. And when these persons, at the moment of graduation, will go to a company or to a ministry or a university with a certain post, just like that, and feeling forever grateful to those people who granted him that scholarship. This was the plan implemented based on the experience they got in the continent. Together with that, a very strong disparagement campaign as the one they launched against Cuba to tighten further the blockade, and then the Obama policy following a certain plan, and then the maximum pressure policy applied by Donald Trump. What was supposedly be happening within 10 years' time? We are speaking about 2004 when the project started. Plus 10 years, that makes us to reach 2014, or rather 2019. In 2019, the plan should have been ready. Thousands of Cuban youths would have been trained in their universities, cultural disparagement, warfare, the construction inside Cuba of a critical mass of persons that no longer believed in the revolution, people who could be influenced through this cultural warfare to create that critical mass. And what was expected to happen under such circumstances? The one that headed this project in Cuba was myself. At that time, we should become public. We should appear with the support of every media, all media of the world. Speaking about an organization of academic young people in Cuba, intellectuals with concerns regarding the fate of Cuba. An organization that would be called Foundation Genesis for Freedom. The CIA loved to include the word freedom in every project. That foundation would be presented as an organization intended first and foremost to educate the Cuban people, to prepare the Cuban people for change. We would be speaking about a change, and this should become a slogan. This was a label. Change, speaking about change on and on, without saying changing for what. This was about promising the people that we were looking for a change in the country without explaining what was the change all about. And once we would establish that space inside Cuba, we had to promise people that we would not be doing away with the revolution because we were not a political organization, but rather to renovate socialism because socialism was a backward policy and all the historical leaders had stagnated in time, and that Cuban socialism had equally stagnated, and that we had to look for a modern socialism that would live up to the times, capable of leading the country down the path of prosperity and on and on. The second step was to take to the streets, starting to carry out action in the streets, to clash with the authorities, to clash with security forces, to provoke the security forces, to provoke repression according to their instructions, and to go over to the third step, which was to start taking institutions, to occupy government institutions, to block streets, to shut down the main avenues of the country, to mobilize the country, and to wreak havoc. At the beginning, I referred to the Harvey's theory about the implosion of the government, to see to it that the Cuban government would implode. That mixture between economic warfare, a Titan warfare, plus the disparagement campaign causing the isolation of Cuba, and those actions on the ground would make it impossible for the Cuban government to govern, not for them to renounce or resign. What would then happen? I like to insist on that very much because this has to do with what I said at the beginning. At the end of the day, wars continue to be imperial wars. It doesn't matter if they are first or fourth generation wars, because at the end of the day, when chaos reigns in the country, this was not about turning me into the president, but with the support of all those social networks, I would request the U.S. government, on behalf of the Cuban people, a humanitarian intervention in Cuba. I mean, the Marines would come, the U.S. Army would come, they would land in Cuba, they would militarily occupy the country in order to solve the in-governance problem the country was facing. We lived through the experience of July the 11th. You saw the calls of the Miami elements for people to take to the street, but this failed. This failed because we denounced it in time, because they never really managed to find a leader in Cuba that would live up to the goals they pursue. Whenever they recruit a leader in Cuba, they are either mediocre people followed by no one, or a Cuban revolutionary working for the Cuban Revolution. There's one thing which is also true. Whenever there is a government supported by the people, there is no fourth generation war that would persuade him that would be successful. And I believe that the cases of Cuba, Venezuela are clear examples showing that that phrase which headed this wonderful meeting today is a big truth. It is an enormous truth. Trenches of ideas are worth much more than any stone trench. We could be speaking for hours about this, but it is high time for you to speak, make your comments and questions. You have before yourselves a CIA agent, which is me. I worked for the CIA for 7 years. I worked for the U.S. government agencies for many years, for NGOs. I worked for the USAID, for the Pan American Organization for Development. I worked for the OAS. You can ask as many questions as you wish. You have the floor.
Though some of our friends has requested to take the floor, if there is any specific question, particular question about this presentation, we would like to have it now. Is that a specific question or just a comment? Yes, a specific question I have. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm from Peru, and I would like to ask you about your opinion on what is happening now in Peru, because we have to analyze the entire theory and to interpret in a different way what is happening. The social movements are being slaughtered in Peru now with a government that entered with a left-wing position. So, from your viewpoint, how could we counterread or counterinterpret or interpret in a different way this situation if, for us, this riot does not represent the entire policy, but the strategy and the method to defeat the dictatorship, we would say, is similar from the insurgency of the society? There are two different things. If you ask me, which is the method to take out a government, the legitimate president of Peru, the one elected by the people, no doubt, it has the features of this I have explained before. But was impossible for Castillo to take office, was not allowed to govern the country. They built the no possibility of leading the country. And if we pay attention to what is happening and we see the things which are happening in the present government, and compared to the repression against the people, which is different, we are to wonder why the de facto president in Peru is asking for authorization so that foreign armies enter or get into Peru. Isn't it similar to what I said now? So there are similarities to be found in these kind of scenarios. One thing is the legitimate right of the people to protest. When there is the position of this government, which has been elected by the people, which has all rights to represent and defend the government, and something different is the actions to
logre los objetivos que se habían trazado inicialmente.
Prevent Peru from achieving the purposes that are not to be achieved. We can give an opinion about Castillo's government. I'm not anyone, I'm not supposed to do that. I mean, it's an interference in those issues, but the real thing is it was not able to rule the country. He was not able to do anything. And that is part of these kind of strategies. To what extent this woman was part of this plan, we maybe someday know about that when they classified some documents. So perhaps she was, bribed now to turn the mind of many people and to change the way of thinking of many people everywhere. But of course, this is a result of a war against the people of Peru, to prevent the people of Peru to reach the purposes they had when electing this government.
Sí, por favor, otra pregunta por acá. Bueno, como desee, mire acá.
Yes, I have a question from Europe. My question is related to what happens in Latin America. But we have a problem, we have a war in the Mediterranean and so on. My question is, I'm totally convinced that the extreme groups which are doing terrorism, I mean the Islamic groups and some other fascist groups, I've been working some of them with CIA. So as member of the CIA, could you give us some information? Well, I don't have information about that. But as a Cuban, I can give you my opinion, but not as a member of CIA, because I didn't work with them. At the beginning, I was telling you that when we were defining this war, I was wondering some things. For instance, I was thinking about the war against Palestine. Perhaps it's a third generation. It's an imperialist war indeed. And if we were talking here while I was addressing you, in 1989, these 4 Marine officers were defining this and were defining the creation of paramilitary groups, the foundation of guerrilla groups, as they say, to stabilize different governments. So reach your own conclusions. Try to think about that and get your own conclusions about this.
Después el compañero.
Sí, buenas tardes.
Y después pasamos al.
Bueno, voy a hacer una pregunta.
Afternoon, I'm going to ask a question to our friend here, but that has some academic content. Raúl, do you think that there is any link between this that you have shared with us and what happened in the elections in Chile, the constitutional referendum? Do you think there is any relation between the words you expressed and the things which are happening in Santa Cruz, in Bolivia? Is there any relation between the things you have been saying here and what happened or what is taking place or is going to take place in Brazil with Lula? Is there anything you know about what is happening with Cristina in Argentina or with the Alberto Fernández government in Argentina and these things you have been sharing with us? Is there any link, any relation between this and also what was said by Sacha Llorente in this same room that we are celebrating? I mean, we are reminding now the 200th anniversary of a Monroe Doctrine. Could it be an instrument to keep that doctrine, I mean, to keep on considering the region as a backyard of the United States? Is there any comment about this, Raúl? You don't believe it. He's a friend of mine. He's a friend of mine. He's usually reading what I publish in Grandma newspaper. He has been sending these questions to the newspaper. Well, there are some matters that demand a deep analysis because those are different scenarios. There is something I was analyzing here, and there are many things to be analyzed in this non-conventional war strategy. And we might be needing days to analyze it. But one of the important elements to be said here are judicial blows. All this criminalization through law, and those are important elements of the coup. This kind of non-conventional war, the soft coup, and that have been used in the continent. All this is linked to the discredit campaigns, and they want to take out of power all these political personalities and take them away from this political sphere for life. So this disparagement, as they tried to do with Lula, they are trying to take away from him his political capital. It's something we have to consider when analyzing this type of matters. This has been used against Cristina. This has been used against her, trying to put her away from the political scenario. And if we analyze the political scenario in Argentina, of course, Cristina is playing an important, very important role in that puzzle, and to face the right wings with personalities like Macri. Macri is the result of this preparation, of this selection of people that the right wing is doing in the continent, and they decided to put him, to make him public, you know. But now they have this other person.
Milei.
Who is Milei? Who is he? So Macri has a pedigree, let's say, in the Argentinian bourgeoisie, but he studied, you know, you see the place where he studied. Now we see Milei. Milei has a doctrine. We don't know anything about him. And now he's an anti-system person. He's a person who is out of these political traditions in Argentina. And those are people we have to be aware of because they have a specific speech. They have been using all these tools I was mentioning at the beginning. And Cristina is an obstacle for these political possibilities for these personalities. So taking out Cristina of the political scenario is important for them. They are trying to eliminate, to kill her. But they are trying to eliminate Cristina, to put her away from the political scenario. Also, she has a specific meaning in all this process in Argentina during all the prior governments. They have been properly planning all this to achieve their goals, which is very much used today in our continent.
Sí, el muchacho había pedido la palabra.
Sí, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. My name is Juan Guevara. I'm a member of the youth in Venezuela and a sociologist and a writer. And first thing I would like to say is that there is a neo-colonial transmedia war in the world. There is situation in the political scenario. In Europe, there was a lack of information and knowledge, and now there are some writers that are trying to deal with this lack of knowledge and ignorance for the lack of knowledge, or perhaps today is for the excess of information. This is a neo-colonialist position in the media, and now the acts of evil in the colonial world, both in the Americas And Europe is Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. We have more than 90 sanctions against Venezuela. That means $150,000 million in Venezuela in less than 10 years. So in this ideological situation, I have a question: how to overcome that global narrative, which is trying to distort the fair causes of the peoples, how from these small spaces in which we get together try to combat that misinformation or lack of information. There are two main spaces for that in my viewpoint. First, we have to take advantage of the enemy's weapons as we can do, knowingly that these are weapons used by the enemy. Networks, I mean social media, are used even before the internet was used. The internet was useful when creating the websites, but the networks, I mean mass media, is now senseless way of spreading news, and they are trying to make senseless this discourse, this speech, and trying to use the internet to influence the audience in the world. And we have a commitment. We have to publish good content in the social media, and also to be able to answer back. We have to publish things in social media. We try to organize our publications, but we also representing a truth that there is some prohibition to publish this kind of information. Those defending Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba is punished in many, many different ways, sometimes with an open censorship, and some other times eliminating from that digital context all the information that we publish, and also opposing in opinions this information we publish. We are supposed to have our own servers. We have to have our own social media, but that, of course, needs technology, investment, and there are experiences we might learn in these regards to create our own spaces without forgetting about the real space, because one of the tricky things about all this and this kind of work is that they made us believe that everything is taking place in the digital space. But in real terms, we have to be realistic and be here with our feet on the floor, you know. Venezuelans have been living, okay. One thing is the Guarimba. One thing is what is happening in Venezuela. Something different is what the mass media is saying about what is happening in Venezuela. That happened to us on the events of July 11th. Social media was saying something, and we were in a bad position. People were looking at us in a bad way because what was published in the mass media. I had some debates with a group of Italian friends about this. Some communist friends from Italy, and they said, what are we supposed to do? We cannot do anything because they control mass media. They control the internet. They own the social media. And I said, but who used, in the times of Lenin, who owned the means of communication? The Russian and Italian bourgeoisie did not give Gramsci the mass media property for him to have communication with workers and to spread information into the revolutionary forces in that country. Lenin and Gramsci won that battle in the streets, going to different places, talking to people, educating the population, creating their own spaces for debate, and The great challenge of these times is taking new technologies, creating our own networks to be able to face the publications from the enemy, and we have to win those battles. When we get together and we have these revolutionary groups, we always win. I have had the possibilities to be debating in those spaces with many people who were properly articulated and to face these campaigns against Cuba, against Venezuela. We have been properly used all this information. I believe this is the way, is to publish our content, to load our information into digital space so that once our youth are reading Google as a navigator, they do not read only what the enemies of the Bolivarian Revolution are publishing or loading, but they have to read what we load. And I do direct transmissions in YouTube live, speaking about topics defending Cuba, and I see my publication, and there is an immediate response with 60, let's say, visualizations, and then they say I have 27, and I say, how do they do with the people who were following me, and they have the ways to hide all these people who were following the information I had directly published. So we have to win that battle from our knowledge with the truth we defend and represent, and this is the key for success. We need to be permanently telling the people what is really happening in this group of lies and tricky actions. And if we do not do that, we are in disadvantage in this war. And this is a war. It's not exaggeration when we say that.
Sí, muchísimas gracias. ¿Se refiere a alguna pregunta usted, compañero?
Una pregunta muy sencilla, muy.
A simple question I have to ask. In this subversion project, you said that it usually tries to find leaders in the students groups, the people. According to your experience, is it possible to find a change in the top leaders in the Cuban government, trying to find a Gorbachev? Or, according to your experience, is it possible to find people in the Cuban army, for instance? In the video I made, Razones de Cuba, Reasons of Cuba, creating a leader, that question is asked to me, and I'm not comparing you to that. But the question has the same response I gave there. I was asked by CIA, I had some footage about a person from the CIA having a conversation with me using a camera, not sophisticated at all, but I asked for a camera to CIA to make my work and to be able to record all the students I was working with and the professors I was working with, and we were recording was a camera. He didn't realize we were using the weapons of the enemy to record that interview. And he said, do you think it's possible to have a change in Cuba once Fidel Castro disappears? He said Castro disappears. When the Castros disappear, is it possible to have a change in Cuba? And then I answered, that's absolutely impossible. And it's not only an act of faith, It's a matter of knowledge and conviction and total confidence in the people leading our country. It's an absolute trust in the officers from the armed forces, because the armed forces are made up by Cuban people. So those are people who live in the neighborhoods, in the same communities, sharing with us many different things. So if that were some other kind of military, as one trained in the School of the Americas or in some West Palm academy, not trained by American officers, but that persons in Cuba are trained here in Cuba and are part of the people. I happen to be an officer of the armed forces, and I can absolutely tell you that that's not going to happen. If we had that kind of government like the ones that exist in the representative democracies, with people appointed by a party, taken as a candidate, in which money prevailed, making the political career with the money given by that party or that he found with his influence group. If we had that kind of leaders, that might happen. But we have leaders and people taking the top leadership of a country who are a result of the development of the people. People who have been born from this country. Those are people who are not in that position because they have paid, but because their own personal credits. Some people have been elected in the grassroots. And I was telling once, some friends out of Cuba, if some people really knew how democracy in Cuba works, then capitalism might last for 2 hours. There is a campaign everywhere saying that there is only one party, but people, I guess, are to know how Cuban democracy works, and then in some other countries to be impossible to sustain the power of capitalism. So people are aggressive against us, and when people should know also that I myself, as a citizen, elected those in parliament, not by a political party, but was elected by the community. So that person might be my neighbor, sharing with me good and bad things. And a group of neighbors might say, this is a person who represented me in parliament, and that's my deputy, my delegate in my municipality. Is going to be representing me in the community, not receiving a wage for that. So when your government works like that, the real possibilities to have a Gorbachev are very, very few. Because if that happens, that's a hypothesis, very hypothetical thing, this country have such a democracy, that person wouldn't be in power, in office for much, just if that happened. If that person might betray, because the way it is created is almost impossible. And I told that person who asked a similar question, he said, that, do you think the next president in Cuba might be a member of the Communist Party? And I say, yes, it's almost probable. But if not, he's not a member of the Communist Party, we can find someone else by be leading the country in a proper way. I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah, that was a response I was expecting, but I have to say that I have tried in some other opportunities, and you know that. And might be not wrong, totally wrong, that they're still trying to approach some of the leaders of the country. Yes, of course, they are going to, as many times as they think about that possibility. But we also know that. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias y creo que no habrá
Thanks. There is no rupture with this debate. Many of the friends who are here are members or leaders of solidarity organizations, social organizations that every single day are fighting to preserve human values in their communities. I would like to have the authorization of the professor to read a paragraph written by Alan Dulles in 1961 when he was in CIA, and that is the struggle we have today. Honesty shall be a ridiculous thing, they would say, and turned into an old-fashioned idea. Insolence, betray, lies, alcoholism, and drug addiction, irrational fear between human beings, nationalism, lack of friendship between the peoples, and hate against those countries. This is the same strategy that the professor has shown speaking about this war, and this is what we are to eliminate and to invite us to keep on having this kind of debates. So I would like to give the floor to our friend Paula Polanco, president of INTAL from the anti-imperialist movement of Belgium, and I would like to invite Inge Holm, member of the Friendship Association, and then Carmen Dines from the Solidarity Movement in Brazil. Thank you so much. As the lady was saying, I'm Paula Polanco. I'm president of the International Organization and Anti-Imperialist INTAL, and I would like to apologize, first of all, before the people who are doing the interpretation, because maybe some French words might appear in my speech because I have been living in Belgium. Belgium is the capital of Europe, but it's also the place where there is a venue of NATO. I would like to speak about the European context, and then I will speak about my organization and what we are doing to have better mankind. In Belgium and in Europe, I should share with you that we are having a militarization of the continent, which did not started with the war in Ukraine. This has been happening for many years in Europe, and with Donald Trump, all this was accelerated, and now our countries have the duty to have expenditure of 2% of the national GDP. That is happening in this context of total austerity or lack of resources in Europe with these issues related to education. In Europe, we cannot spend the money as they wanted, or financing education and health as they want. And this was seen most of all during pandemic times. Belgium is a country that had no face mask for the people working in hospitals. Many people died or got sick in the hospitals because they didn't have the necessary protection during pandemic. And that happened because the Belgian government decided not to change or substitute all these protection means in the hospitals. So this took the life of many people in Belgium. We also have, speaking about militarization that was demanded by Trump to his European allies throughout NATO, we have 10,000 billion euros spent in the purchase of 24 combat aircraft with nuclear capacity, and we in Belgium have a military base of the United States where they stock nuclear weapons. So if a nuclear war its launch, Belgium might participate without any doubt. So this is the context, and in the midst of this conflict in Ukraine, all this is accelerated. Our Minister of Defense, for instance, approached the Council of Ministers to ask that this military help or assistance to Ukraine might be increased and to spend 90 million of euros for this assistance. So Europe is spending about 3 billion euros to help Ukraine in this context of reduced expenditures for education and health, but it has increased for military expenditures. With this Ukraine war, there is also a difficult context for the European and Belgian population. There is a direct impact in the well-being of our people, and the most serious thing is that we have been approaching U.S. to have gas for oil, fuel, and electricity. And there are few possibilities in Europe to have an independent energy policy and diplomacy with Russia.
Con el contexto de las sanciones, pero también hace que tenemos más de
This put an end to these sanctions, and we have more than 12% inflation. This, of course, has an impact in society. For instance, electricity bill for me before war was on about 120 euros per month, and now it's more than 800 euros, the bill for electricity. Most of the people cannot pay that bill. Another situation in Europe is the war campaign we have to colonize, to attract the mind, the way of thinking of the population in Europe. But we are told that we are to assist Ukraine by sending weapons.
Bueno, como organización antiimperialista y por la paz,
as anti-imperialist and peaceful organization, when the war in Ukraine appeared, this movement was weakened in Europe, and we still have that task to rebuild a movement for peace, able to mobilize
concientizar la gente
and create awareness in the people about peace. So with Intel, we have two different branches of work. One is fundamental for us, and is the possibility of creating a front with trade unions, because we are aware that the war in Ukraine made us feel much more aware that we cannot have a peace movement without the participation of workers. And we have also good news. We were able to create a front, and with the trade unions, we shall have a demonstration February 26th. I say this because for trade unions was not easy task. In Europe and in my country, trade unions were divided in issues related to peace and about the possibility of not sending weapons to Ukraine. So we have this front in which we include non-governmental organizations, Christian movements, trade unions, climate movements, youth, of course, and we are trying to make this front broader. And we have to work with to develop different tasks. And one of those purposes is to call our governments for democracy and disarmament. The second thing is to have a European independent movement, and we're following in a blind way what the United States is saying, and this is creating poverty and inequity in Europe. The third point we would like to implement in this front is this demonstration, Europe for Peace, and it's to call the government to block the price of energies and to lead the social sectors in issues related to health and education. And this is important to have a link between the vindication of trade unions, which are making the possibilities of workers to enhance their well-being and to get away from the economic and social crisis we are in. This is part of our work. And the second part of what we do is to be together with this broad front with the trade unions to have our own campaign, because it's also important to highlight and analyze why this war is taking place. And also, a campaign started on January the 21st, and it's negotiating peace. But with this simple name, we would like to have an anti-imperialist approach. And of course, we want to condemn the confrontation logic and imperialist policies of the United States and NATO. And the logic thing about wars is that we oppose the need of a multipolar world, and that is important for achieving transformations and create sensitivity in the population in Belgium. Today, the United States are trying to keep hegemony. And for that, the U.S. can count, unfortunately, with the NATO-allied countries in Europe, which are ready to sacrifice their people to defend foreign interests. Today, people shall be paying for this, and we are already having some impact, strong, considerable impact on this. In Brussels, a child of 1 out of 4 persons are living in poverty. This is a country having this situation of poverty, and they are still criticizing Cuba. So with Intel, we also need an approach and to analyze what is happening in the South. Europe is following the ideas of the United States, and also we see that some people in the South are not following what the United States is doing, not because they support the invasion, the situation between Ukraine and Russia, but they recognize that a unipolar world led by the United States is a deep mistake for the future of humanity. This is the political and analytical approach we wanted to share with you. And we also realized that with the pandemic, it was quite difficult to put together our people and to mobilize our people. So we had 12 groups in the country, and we are 600 members. Before pandemic, we were able to count 400 people who were able to get together very fast. But with the pandemic, we have this separation. It was difficult for us to give a dynamic nature to our movement, and we are doing that with new techniques. We are having less meetings, and we are working more with young people using the networks, as the comrade said here, which is so important, involving the young people. And also, we are making reflections about specific and concrete projects to fastly mobilize the people who are really waiting
Muchas gracias.
for this call. Thank you so much.
Paola. Le pasamos la
We now give the floor to Inge,
después a Carmen.
then Carmes Viniz, and if there is any other friend requesting the floor, please approach the chair. Inge.
Dear participants, dear friends, a world in balance with everyone and for the best for everyone is a beautiful goal. But is it possible? Of course it's possible. But can it be achieved without solidarity? Solidarity between people, both at home and abroad, is a step on the way to the best for everyone. International solidarity is a powerful tool against the aggressive imperialism we are witnessing. As a consequence of the increasing imperialist aggressiveness and the geopolitical restructuring, we encounter a new escalation of the armed race, a strengthening of NATO, the emergence of new military alliance, an aggression of tension and military conflicts. International solidarity is anti-imperialistic. It is not solidarity when the United States sends soldiers out in the world. But it's solidarity when Cuba sent health personnel out in the world. Therefore, the Nobel Peace Prize should go to the Henry Rivi Brigade for the act of solidarity that it's carried out. That international solidarity is necessary has been shown over time in many ways. The protest against US dirty war in Vietnam, the struggle for Nelson Mandela's release, and the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. Solidarity with the Sandinist revolution in Nicaragua. Solidarity with Salvador Allende and the people of Chile. Solidarity with Venezuela under Hugo Chavez and now Maduro. Solidarity with the Palestinians for a free Palestine, and many more. Last but not least, solidarity with Cuba, where international solidarity has been an instrument in a few major victories. Elian Gonzalez came back to Cuba, to his family. For the release for the 5 Cubans, there was a strong campaign throughout the whole world, and it won. All of the 5 are home in Cuba. But we still need some matches where the necessary solidarity, international solidarity, must do its utmost. The fight to return the US-occupied area of Guantanamo. And not at least the fight against the criminal blockade against Cuba, where US imperialism shows its truly ugly face, with continuing and tightening the blockade despite most countries at the UN General Assembly voting for the blockade to be lifted. Totally disrespectful behavior towards towards this decision. The criminal war is also felt by others, since United States sanctions and threaten everyone who want to have a natural or has a natural and ordinary relationship with Cuba. The right to determine one's own development in solidarity with the struggle of the working class for a life in peace and with economic progress, and the right to education and health. It is necessary to strengthen solidarity with those who reject the aggressiveness and interference of imperialism, with those who reject to use blockades, sanctions, and coercions as instrument of pressure and blackmail on government and people. If solidarity is something you only want when you yourself needed it, then solidarity no longer exists. So, strengthening international solidarity is absolutely necessary because a better world is possible. Thank you very much.
Gracias a usted, querida amiga.
Thank you, dear friend. We will have Carmen Diniz, and then I will ask Barón Odromo, President of the Ecuadorian organization, to prepare, and after him, our friend from Tanzania. When we arrived in Cuba, whenever we travel from other countries into Cuba, Cubans say to us, thank you for your solidarity. And whenever I hear that, I answer, please do not tell me thank you, because I have a long list to feel grateful for with regards to Cuba. As a Brazilian, I have a moral obligation to thank Cubans a lot, especially for the 14,000 doctors who traveled to Brazil. 14,000 doctors, they went to assist persons where the Brazilian doctors would never go. The result is that right now we have 700 Brazilian cities without medical assistance. Right now, we have 60 million inhabitants. In Brazil, everything is about millions. We are a big country. Without medical assistance, after the Cuban doctors left, 1 year before the unnamed took office. At the indigenous communities in Brazil, 1 year after the Cuban doctors left, the infant mortality rate increased by 12%. Do you know what this is all about? The number of children who died because of a lack of medical assistance, because the Cuban doctors left and there were no replacements. I do not, unfortunately for us, we were left without no one to assist the Brazilians. But we cannot criticize the Cuban government for that, because the Cuban government had to protect the doctors from a genocidal person. Now there is the biggest indigenous community in the country, had 570 indigenous children who died out of a lack of food, out of problems with drinkable water, malaria, mining is very polluting there. This is a problem that right now we are going to solve. The landless movement I am a part of is teaching people how to read and write. We're teaching thousands using the Cuban method, Yes, I Can. In Brazil, this is called Se eu posso. We are teaching not only persons within the landless movement, we are teaching the indigenous, fishing people, the poor people in Brazil. And this is just an example of what Cuba is given to us. Cuba is a beacon in Latin America. What would we be like without Cuba in this continent? Thanks to the dignity of all Cubans. So I heard you speak about the fourth generation war, and I felt you were speaking about the Workers' Party in Brazil. Lula was in prison for almost 2 years. I do not know if there is any other similar example in the world. We went for a demonstration in the prison where he was being kept, and we were there on a daily basis, and we said, "Good morning, President Lula," and in the afternoon, "Good afternoon, President Lula," and he was listening. And we did that 13 times, because 13 is the number of the Workers' Party in Brazil on a daily basis, and up to this day, Lula has been speaking about that. And we managed to oust the unnamed, the one who had money, fake news, the social networks, the weapons, because he is also a paramilitary. Bolsonaro is a paramilitary. He belongs to a paramilitary group which assassinated our Marielles Franco. There is no evidence of that, but we know it was them. All that was part of the government machinery, the money, the weapons, internet, the social networks, and we defeated him in the streets. So when we think about the empire and all it has, I say to myself, our continent, Latin America, I do not know if it is the only in the world which is always very responsive. Right now, we have a challenge in Colombia, in Venezuela, we have Nicaragua, we have Xiomara in Honduras. It is not enough to have social networks, because we have ourselves. We have persons. If you have robots and social networks, we have ourselves. We have millions of persons in the countryside who are there training others. Latin America is the only continent doing that. We are growing bigger. Sometimes people think that we are losing this battle because we are fighting with a very powerful empire. No, 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 it's not that. We are always improving. I have a story right now, and with this I conclude, and a slogan. The story is this. One of the first times I came to Cuba to take a criminology course, I have two daughters. One of them, Mariana, was not exactly a young socialist girl. She was not. And I was a little bit afraid because I said she wanted to have a Coca-Cola, and in Cuba there is no Coca-Cola. She would ask us several things that in Cuba they do not provide. How would that be? I thought to myself, and one day we were cooking at home and we were running out of salt. And we went to a little store. I asked him, "Do you have salt?" "Yeah, yeah." And a neighbor gave me a little bit. "No, no, no, nothing. I have a lot of salt." One evening, she heard Commander-in-Chief speaking. She didn't sleep very well at night, and she heard the speech, and she said, "A beautiful speech by Fidel." And I asked him, "Where did you listen to him?" "Okay, on a radio," she said to me. "Well, my daughter was listening to Fidel, and Fidel was making a long speech. And then I got her a CD with Fidel's speeches, and I mean, it wasn't me to compel her to know Cuba. She was the one who got to know Cuba. And on the plane, I asked Mariana, "What do you think about Cuba? Did you like Cuba?" She was already studying letters at the university, and she said to me, "Mommy, that is not a country, that is an idea." And I said to myself, how beautiful. Cuba is not a country, is an idea, a different idea. So I felt very happy. It is not us that we that visit Cuba. Cuba is coming inside ourselves. And I'm speaking about a person who knew nothing about Cuba. So that is the story I wanted to tell. And the slogan is that a slogan that we used a lot within the landless movement. And I ask you to repeat with me. Alerta, alerta. Latin America would become all over socialist. Latin America would become socialist.
Sí, por favor, el amigo Barrón.
Our friend Barrón, please approach the microphone. And I will mention several of the persons requesting the floor. I ask them, please, to make a rational use of time so that all of you could share with us your ideas. Right now, we will listen to Barrón. I ask our friend from Tanzania to come closer to the podium. Our friend Renata, please get ready. Our friend Jose Octavio and Leonid Sabin will come next. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. First, I would like to apologize because I was summoned 3 times and I was not in the room. But the important thing is that you are here already. Okay. I had to take care of some matters. I belong to a political trade union political organization. My name is Barón Hidrogo. I come from the province where General Eloy Alfaro was born. He used to be a friend, a brother of the Cuban martyr Jose Marti. Thus, our feelings of friendship and brotherhood towards Cuba, you should remember, those of you who are Cubans might remember that General Alfaro committed to come together with Martí in the struggle for the independence of Cuba. He was not able to do so because he became president of Ecuador as part of the liberal revolution, but he sent 100 farmers to struggle together with the Cuban Mambises. 44 finally came. They had some problems during the journey, and he sent his amazing brother a sword that belonged to him. And some years ago, at this very same convention on November the 14th of 2001, the first meeting to struggle against the FTAA, a 10-year-old boy handed over to Commander Fidel Castro a Banamita sword with a symbol. And he said, "Please, Commander, take these for you to defend the Cuban Revolution." I come from Manabí, a hot land. We used to call Fidel fighters the bearded, the barbudos. We created the first committee in solidarity with the Cuban guerrilla fighters. Thus, the origin of our friendship, we have not deviated from that, not even by an inch. We consider ourselves to be Cubans born in Manabí in Ecuador. But I would like to tell you something about the importance of solidarity. I carefully heard your presentation, Comrade Raul, and I have observed that in Ecuador, for some time now, we have been witnessing that so-called fourth generation war in the media, in the social media. The matter is this: what are we supposed to do to face that war, which is not about a war against Cuba? It is a war against all peoples that struggle against the empire. So we have to be on the alert. But in Cuba, we won't see any Gorbachev. Here we have a firm struggle for the defense of the Cuban Revolution. Nothing and no one will stop them from going forward in the construction of socialism in Cuba. Thank you very much. Now I will refer to solidarity. And the Brazilian comrade was asking, how come you speak about solidarity so much here in Cuba? My speech will be short here, but in Manabí and elsewhere in Ecuador, I am told you are more Cuban than Ecuadorian. That's okay. Let them keep on saying that. I will not regret that. On February the 5th, I'll be 63 years old. 63 of being a militant and a friend of Cuba, and I will die being a loyal friend of Cuba and a communist, and nobody will stop me from that. But I will answer them Why do I consider myself a Cuban? Why I am a friend of Cuba's? In these days, I have heard people speaking about history in Ecuador. People have forgotten to teach the real history. Is it so that the shell hero of the Battle of Pichincha for the independence of Ecuador, Aldón Calderón, was not a child of Cuban parents? Is it not that there has been a Cuban blood shed in the struggle of the people of Ecuador? Isn't it so that a Cuban arrived in Ecuador at the request of Eloy Alfaro to organize trade unions and craftsmen organizations? This is an example of solidarity that dates back to years from Cuba to Ecuador. Isn't it so that Cuba was the first country to arrive in Ecuador at the time of the earthquake in Cayame? On April the 16th, I was a victim of the last earthquake in the province of Manabí. A few hours after the earthquake, I received a telephone call in my cell from Comrade Dausa, Cuban ambassador to Ecuador, saying me that from Havana to Ecuador, there is a brigade of rescuers and doctors from Cuba. That is a real, effective example of the Cuban people. How can I forget that around 500 Manabí youngsters have studied medicine free of charge here in Cuba? How come I will forget that? I cannot be ungrateful. How can I stop responding to this full friendship without any interest shown first by Commander-in-Chief that transforms the building of the Navy into a Latin American School of Medicine? What a noble gesture to help all the peoples of the world to have their own doctors and create the army of white robes, as he described it. This is an example of solidarity, but I have come here we, the people from Manabí, are very hot people. We are very fighting people, and we feel outraged when we see that there is no reaction towards the continued and systematic attacks by the empire through their henchmen against Cuba. And we say nothing. We do not make a call. We have solidarity coordinators with Cuba, but just for attending meetings and taking coffees or attending celebrations. Solidarity must change. In addition to all of these activities, which are okay, we have to be much more efficient. There shouldn't be a single person who, after listening or reading about an attack against Cuba, to remain silent. There should be an immediate reaction, and there we will show whether we are siding up with Cuba or not. We, the farmers, say, let's cut the crap. Let us show our solidarity with Cuba. So it is necessary, very necessary, for us to strengthen the friendship and solidarity organizations with Cuba. We have to be much more effective. I listened our commander-in-chief, Fidel Castro, when he was 70 years old. And one of our comrades, Guayasamín, paid tribute to him here in Havana. And he said, in order to be successful in Cuba, you required three things: organization, unity, and determination. So I believe that in this solidarity meeting, we should call for the strengthening of the friendship and solidarity organizations with Cuba. We should expand our unity with other sectors which are not part of this solidarity movement with Cuba, and we should be determined to struggle for Cuba to demand compliance with the last resolution adopted by the UN to put an end to the blockade against Cuba. But this blockade against Cuba should not only be condemned in words, we should take effective action against the blockade. How can we do that? We have friends who are entrepreneurs, who are traders. Let them come to Cuba and establish commercial relations and other types of relations. That is the way to make the struggle against the blockade effective. Long live Fidel. Fidel is always living within us. Long live Raúl. Long live Che, Camilo, Fidel, the five heroes. Long live Cuba, today, tomorrow, and always, ever onwards to victory.
Muchas gracias, querido amigo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, our dear friend. Thank you for your inspiration. Please, Godfrey Madaraka Nyerere, representative of Tanzania and relative of Julius Nyerere, the former president of Tanzania, you may take the floor. After him, Renata, Jose Octavio, Libre Sankara will come next. Assis Tank, Aberhard Schutz. Please get ready.
Distinguished delegates, good afternoon. And thank you for the introduction. I bring with me warm and fraternal greetings from the people of the United Republic of Tanzania, and particularly from my mother, Mama Maria Rede, who asked me to convey to you and to our Cuban brothers and sisters greetings as well as a goodwill message for a successful meeting. I thank the organizers for the invitation extended to me to participate in this important conference, whose main goal is to discuss global challenges and come up with proposed solutions. This invitation is a great honor, not only to me, but also to my country, Tanzania, and to my fellow compatriots. It is a result of the friendly bilateral relations that exist between the United Republic of Tanzania and the Republic of Cuba. These two countries have long-standing and historic bilateral relations dating back to the early 1960s, when they established diplomatic relations which are well coordinated by the respective embassies of the two capitals. Since then, the two countries have been working together at bilateral as well as regional and international levels. We owe this continuing cooperation to the then leaders of the two countries, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, the first president of Tanzania, and to his counterpart, Comandante Fidel Castro Ruz of Cuba. These two leaders laid the strong foundation on which these friendly relations are built. Therefore, my being here today is a clear testimony of the closeness that exists between the two countries and their peoples. It would be a huge injustice to the history of the African liberation struggle, not to mention the moral and material support of the people and government of Cuba to that struggle. The focal point of that contribution was in Angola against the army of apartheid South Africa, but the outcome of that battle of Cuito-Cuanavale precipitated the independence of Angola, of Namibia, and eventually the democratization of South Africa. As Cuba stood in solidarity with the people of Africa then, we also have a fundamental duty to stand in solidarity with Cuba now. I, as a Tanzanian, benefited from the liberation of Angola and Namibia as much as the citizens of those two countries. I was very glad to learn yesterday that the president of ICA is also a veteran of the Angolan war. So the African continent has been contributing to the history and culture of Cuba for many centuries. But in recent decades now, we see that Cuba is also contributing to the history of Africa. So once again, I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Asante sana.
Gracias a usted.
Thank you. Renata, please, you've got the floor. Jose Octavio, be ready to take the floor. We have Sankara here. Is Sankara in the room? Good afternoon. I'm conveying a message from the people of Chile. We cannot, the interpreters cannot listen to the speaker. Sorry. We cannot listen to the speaker. Is anyone please able to help the speaker and fit the microphone so that we, the interpreters, can listen to the speaker? However, this is not the only thing that he was able to do. What puts together Chile and Cuba.
Pégate un poquito el micrófono. Ahora, los traductores, ¿sí?
Tiene que hablar. Que hable. However, this is not the only reason that puts together Cuba and Chile. But what happens is solidarity is the best thing here. It's replicated. Is to be replicated in every sphere of society. Today, the people of Cuba is victim of the imperialist blockade. This is harmful for all Cubans, and in facing this, the question might be, what other countries might do to help? And the answer is easy. We have to execute actions showing the solidarity that Cuba needs, but now exposing what the U.S. is really doing, given the manipulation in the mass media about this matter. The path is going to be difficult, but Cuba has shown that nothing is impossible and we can achieve all our goals. We have learned this during these opportunities, and I have been able to see places where we can see revolutionary resistance in the people of Cuba. And we are to be with you and showing that the people sat together. Thank you so much, and long live solidarity.
Sí, antes de que tenga la palabra Octavio, que ya se está...
Before giving the floor to Octavio, I would like to know if we can have a assist tank in the room. Ralph Schultz, Marta Eugenia. She had asked the floor for a question. So, Jose Octavio, to conclude then.
Muy buenas tardes, compañeras y compañeros.
Good morning, comrades. All Jose Octavio Toledo from Peru. I'm a theologist and activist of human rights, and a physical therapist and sports. That's a main economic, that's what I do for a living. And tomorrow I have a presentation on the penalization of neo-Pentecostalism in the Caribbean, with emphasis in Cuba, to put away, to face the United States statements and say that no rights are violated here. And on the contrary, the system that finances some religious groups in Cuba to be making protests against the government. However, this in Cuba, they achieve equity of rights for women and races. What I'm going to tell you now is what has happened during these days in this event. And this is what's happening in Peru, which is also to be told. This is not going to be reflected in the final minutes of this event. This is a personal initiative which has been supported by some of my comrades. I would like to read this minute, and I would like to have this document to get to some other platforms to let everyone know that we all know about what the blockade of the information in Peru does not allow to be known. We artists and participants in the 5th International Conference for the Balance of the World in Havana from the 24th to 28th of January, we tell the international public opinion that the resolution of conflict based on a harmonious position between the peoples, trying to find new models that put away the hegemonic paradigm based on terror and mercantilization. We denounce first the situation in which the people of Peru is going through, discriminated by years in the southwest and east side of the country. Second, we denounce, according to a report of the Coordinator of Human Rights and the Defense of the People in a report on 25th of January about the events after December 22, year 23, in the use of force by military forces, the death of 10 people and 1 police officer killed, with 9 minors of age killed also, and 62 people who have died because of the massacre, which is the third denounce we make, with 46 extrajudicial execution and 112 civilians that have been hurt in this control of multitudes using glasses and bullets with AKM rifles used by the police in Peru and the army. We likewise denounce the use of tear bombs launched against the people who were in these demonstrations and also against other people in the streets. We denounce this mistreatment and sexual violence from the police of Peru, as well as the detention of many of the people making the demonstration and other persons from the universities. All this made us remember this repression, the methods used in the School of the Americas and the South Command during the dictatorship of our people. And we, from this place, are opposed to the re-existence of this situation. This is now democracy of a result of the comprehensive well-being of the people and because of the killing of our Quechua and other indigenous peoples. We would like to denounce all these sex and, gender and aboriginal discrimination. We would like to say that we are being investigated by the police forces. 7th, we denounce the breaking of international peace that generates this disrespectful position for international agreements for peace. Eighth, we denounce once again the participation of other entities like OAS in this situation, and the present regime is far from being a democratic representative of our people. For all this, we demand first the immediate stop of these forces. Second, the stop of terrorism, allowing the peaceful protest of our people and allowing these demonstrations to happen. Third, we demand respect to the civil society in Peru with the fast happening of elections to establish the wished dialogue. Then we demand the law enforcement for those responsible of the violation of rights that have been mentioned, starting with the responsibilities mentioned in these public officers. We are Peru, and we are each of the people fighting for sustainable peace with social justice. No more killings. Thank you.
Saludos, compañeros. Bueno, tenemos acá a la amiga.
Greetings. We have our friend Liz, who is the Vice President of World Beyond War, an organization that she also leads from New Zealand, which is an international organization, and she's going to make her intervention here.
Buenas tardes, amiga, amigo. Gracias for the hospitality of the Cuban people and the friendship and all those who have helped us to be here today. My organization, World Beyond War, believes in peace and peacemaking and an end to all wars everywhere throughout the world. And we have, it's a young organization, but we want to have members in every country. And we have already members.
Please, Liz, can you use the other microphone?
Hello, is that better? Hola. So, we believe that there is three main ways that we're working on, which is divesting from weapons, and we encourage all organisations to take their money out of any divestment funds, any investment funds which promote weapons. Secondly, we work on peace education and teaching and training non-violent ways to deal with conflict. And thirdly, we campaign to stop military bases, to close military bases. And we work with organisations in many different countries, including Colombia, in Japan, in Australia, in the Philippines, in Japan, Guam, the United Kingdom, Canada, etc. We have a pledge, and we would invite you to go to our website on World Beyond War, and we have translations in Spanish and many other languages. And I would like to invite you to have a read of our peace pledge, and if you would like to sign that and to join us in this work, we would be very happy about that. Our peace pledge goes like this. I understand that wars and militarism make us less safe rather than protect us, that they kill, injure and traumatize adults, children and infants, severely damage the natural environment, erode civil liberties and drain our economies, siphoning resources from life-affirming activities. I commit to engage in and support non-violent efforts to end all war and preparations for war, and to create a sustainable and just peace. So thank you so much, Lema, for all the work that you're doing and all the organisations and ECAP. And I wish you well for the rest of the day and the rest of the conference. Gracias. Hola.
Gracias a ti, Liz, y a los demás compañeros. Bueno, ya vamos terminando.
Now we will wrap up all this. We have been talking about unity, solidarity, and how to fight together for a better world, and keeping internationalism, for strengthening the human family to which we all belong, and for putting together our efforts with all the peace and solidarity organizations. So we would like to thank you for your participation and to keep on working and consulting the social network and all the information given by the organizing committee and the networks from ECAP. Thank you so much. And before we leave, I will tell you that after 6 p.m., we are invited to take the buses to go to the torches demonstration to pay tribute to José Martí.